Hey there. So something's up with my computer, but I think you can see me. So if someone would please comment and let me know, that would be a great help. So I'm gonna just check in. I'm gonna use my phone because, I'm savvy that way and see if I can see me on the phone because, one way or another, we're gonna make this happen. Because, one way or another, we're gonna make this happen. So I think it's happening. Anyway, I'm sitting here. Actually, I'm in Daytona, and so I'm thinking the signal's not that great no matter what I seem to do. I have my own MiFi, and it's got a lot of bars, and I seem to be, connected. Good. So it's so funny. I have my laptop right here. I have my cell phone right here. Um, let's just say I'm not even in St. Augustine right now, but it's pretty cool. We're going to make it work. So sorry for the clumsy start. This is just always what happens. And it's already 3 o'clock, so none of that dilly-dallying that I usually do. I hope everybody is well on this lovely afternoon. I'm going to do a brief chat about another one of our St. John's Reads books. Um, oh, and for those who might not know, I am Harold George. I am your Extension Services Manager for the St. Johns County Public Library System, and it's really my pleasure to talk to you this afternoon. Um, things are going well with us here with the library system. We hope things continue to go well with you folks at home and out in the world. We are happy that we're seeing more of your smiling faces, and we hope to see even more as time goes by. But we have something every year called St. John's Reads, and that is a community reads um, program of events. It lasts all of the month of February. We've been doing this now since continuously since 2006. We did it once in 2004, and we decided that we needed to do it independently and do our own program. So we've been going strong for this will be 14 years now. And every February, we design programs built around the many themes of a book. Um, we do, of course, book talks. That goes without saying. Books and bites. There's always food. Every program we ever do has to have some food. So books and bites would be influenced by the culinary attributes of the characters or the cultures or the societies depicted in the books. And we also do a lot of other fun things. Sometimes it's movies, sometimes it's music. But we do a wide variety of programming because we love it when people come together at the library, both by way of our meeting rooms, our programs, and here online. And then, matter of fact, we're doing something different this summer. We're doing our best summer ever adult and youth reading program. We have an app called Read Squared, and it's a pretty cool app. And you reach different levels as you go up through your gathering of points. There's a secret code that I think I might be mentioning somewhere along the way. Somebody might actually put it in the comments. And there are some cool prizes towards the end of this experience. So to learn more about the Read Squared app, if you go to your app store and search Read Squared, it's pretty easy to download. And then you can search for your library system, or you can go to a really cool place on the internet called our website. That would be www.sjcpls.org. Scroll down a bit and you'll see the announcement about the Read Squared app and the best summer ever. And the best summer ever always gets to be us because we spend it with you. So the book I'm going to talk a little bit about today is Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I must admit, I'm hoping you can see this okay since I can't see my own image. And we'll talk about it a little bit more. So this, so far I've talked about Susan Orlean's The Library Book. I've also talked about David McCullough's Wright Brothers. And this is another book that we're going to talk about. This book is definitely more of a local history connection. And it's kind of a fun coincidence. I'm actually in Daytona today, talking to you from Daytona. And the writer, Zora Neale Hurston, had a very strong lean towards the theatrical and dramatic arts, wrote many plays, and she even established an Academy of Dramatic Arts at Bethune-Cookman College here in Daytona. That was, I think, in 1934. So it's nice to always find the connection to an author. This morning, when I was with my brother, he came to visit, and we went to the cemetery to visit some families' graves. And there's a big sign on a tree at Evergreen Cemetery that points people in the direction of the grave of Randolph Caldecott. I guess you might say in that cemetery he's our local celebrity. But I wonder how many people know that if you head out west on West King Street, not too far west past the railroad tracks, is a place where Zora Neale Hurston once lived, here in St. Augustine, as she traveled through as part of the Federal Writers Project, one of the many New Deal programs to support artists and writers, and also to document the human experience and what was happening throughout our country at a very challenging time, the Great Depression. So, of course, you may have heard of Stetson Kennedy. She is affiliated with him and spent a lot of time working with him. And what I really love about this book is the sense of place and time. More so than so many other books I've ever read. The sense of place and time is really strong with this. This was written throughout the 20s, published in 1937. This is probably her best known book. It tells the story of an African American woman named Janie Crawford. The story of her growing up. She is the descendant of slaves. She has three husbands as she travels through life in search of a life she can call her own. And she's encouraged to find a husband who will take care and protect her, but she's always in search of someone she would love. And so that is a tale of her different experiences. And the story culminates in both an incredible experience of the 1928 Okeechobee, Lake Okeechobee experience of the 1928 hurricane here in Florida, and it culminates in a trial because she, with her third husband, has to escape her house as part of the trial, and they encounter a rabid dog. Her husband is bitten by this dog and becomes increasingly jealous and violent. And in the process, he suffers from a gunshot wound and dies. And she is placed on trial for that shooting. And it tells the story of her relationship to her community, her relationship to her husbands and the jury. But more than anything, this story is a great tale of African American woman experience in the early 20th century. I have to admit, I tend to read nonfiction more than fiction, and if you'll notice, the first two books that I talked about were nonfiction. Great books, but and a good writer can put you any place with anybody with any experience. But what I really appreciate about a book like this and other books of authors of her time is that they can take us inside the lives of people that we might not personally know. They can show us insights to an experience that no matter how empathetic and how open we are to learning about people like her, this is a much easier way to get there that we might never be able to understand. So I highly encourage you to pick up this book and read it. There is some colloquialisms and hard language that would be difficult for a lot of people these days to necessarily want to read or repeat. It is, written by Zora Neale Hurston herself. It is a document of the people and places of Central and South Florida during very hard times. It is also, I mentioned the 1928 hurricane in Lake Okeechobee, and I especially learn or appreciate learning about that experience through her tale because it really talks about the experience of people escaping this disastrous experience. My father, I'm the youngest child of a very large family. My father was 7 years old and lived on the shores of Lake Okeechobee when that hurricane struck. And I remember him telling stories about how his mother took all the children away and his father refused to leave. And the good news is his father was okay, but there wasn't really much left for them to come back to. And so it's always interesting when you can see um, an experience that you've heard from people in your life told through the eyes of someone else. So I'd like to read a couple of passages from this book because there are real just places of poetry throughout. It's definitely a story of the difficulty of being an African American woman in the early 20th century when, you know, during that time, the the husband of an African American woman was definitely dominated and subjugated by, the white men in the community. And so the women were often at the lowest end of the totem pole and suffered greatly. And this, much like the story of Celie in The Color Purple, is a story of a woman who prevails in spite of the abuse and the difficulties thrown her way. So I'm going to start off with one of the themes. There's multiple themes in this book, and one of the themes I love is her connection to nature and to the world. So here we go. Bear with me, folks. Hopefully I'll do it some justice. So Janie waited a bloom time and a green time and an orange time. But when the pollen again gilded the sun and sifted down on the world, she began to stand around the gate and expect things. What things? She didn't know exactly. Her breath was gusty and short. She knew things that nobody had ever told her. For instance, the words of the trees and the wind. She often spoke to falling seeds and said, "Ah, I hope you fall on the soft ground," because she had heard the seeds saying to each other as they passed. So another passage that I especially like to read to you is that I would say that this book, even though it tells a story from the late 1920s, it made me think a lot of the Depression era novel The Grapes of Wrath and its tale of people struggling to make a living. And we think of the Roaring Twenties and the great prosperity of the 20s, but that prosperity didn't reach everyone, and it's certainly not the people of the migrant farm community. And so she describes watching the traveling and the arriving of the people as they head seasonally to South Florida. Day by day now, the hordes of workers poured in. Some came limping with their shoes and sore feet from walking. It's hard trying to follow your shoe instead of your shoe following you. They came in wagons from way up in Georgia. They came in truckloads from east, west, north, and south. Permanent transients with no attachments, and tired-looking men with their families and dogs in flivvers. All night, all day, hurrying in to pick beans. Skillets, beds, patched up spare inner tubes, all hanging and dangling from the ancient cars on the outside, and hopeful humanity herded and hovered on the inside, chugging on to the muck, people ugly from ignorance and broken from being poor. That's a mouthful, and that tells me so much about the people who were responsible for putting food on the table of the Depression era society, something that we've come to talk about a lot during our COVID-19 quarantine. Finally, I'll just read this little last section to you that I really enjoyed because I always like to find the title line to any book and film. And this is a description of, much like my grandfather, apparently, that my dad tells me how he decided to take a nap when the hurricane was arriving and his mom and the kids took off. These folks weren't leaving, but of course, the people in this story had no place to go. So they had to stay at their home as the storm ascended. A big burst of thunder and lightning that trampled over the roof of the house. So Tea Cake and Motor stopped playing. Motor looked up in his angel-looking way and said, "Big Massa's trying to draw up the chairs upstairs." They huddled closer and stared at the door. They didn't just use another part of their bodies, and they didn't look at anything but the door. The time was past for asking the white folks what to look through that door. Six eyes were questioning God. Through the screaming wind, they heard things crashing and things hurtling and dashing with unbelievable velocity. A baby rabbit, terror-ridden, squirmed through a hole in the floor and squatted off there in the shadows against the wall, seeming to know that at this time nobody wanted its flesh. and the lake got madder and madder with only its dikes between them and him. So, what I would like to say about this book is that if nothing else, it's an experience. And it's an experience that sometimes you'd get a taste of if you listen to folks who lived in old Florida or people who definitely still live in the middle part of, or even in the Everglades. But it's not a tale that we bump into every day. And for me, if nothing else, that's where the true value of this book lies. That it's a time capsule, it's a window into a world that we don't often get a chance to discover and learn about. So I highly recommend Their Eyes Were Watching God. What is amazing to me is that this book is so much part of our modern literature teaching classes. We hear about it a lot. It's been considered before for St. John's Reads. But there was a time where Zora Neale Hurston pretty much disappeared, and by the time Alice Walker started writing about her, all of the works of Zora Neale Hurston were out of print. And Alice Walker actually found her unmarked grave and placed a gravestone on there where she had been at least 30 years. Nobody knew where to find her exactly, but through Alice Walker's investigation, she found the grave of Zora Neale Hurston, and she did much to bring her to the forefront. This author, who was a big part of the Harlem Renaissance, proved to be an inspiration for Walker, and I like to read a quote from her that I especially appreciate. Her work had a sense of Black people as complete, complex, undiminished human beings. And that was crucial to me as a writer. And what I love about Alice Walker and what I love about Zora Neale Hurston is that in the end, they tell the stories of people that none of us might necessarily consider if it wasn't put to us in a fashion that we would take the time to notice. I'm going to wrap this up with one of my favorite quotes. Viola Davis won the Academy Award 3 years ago. She got the Best Supporting Actress for Fences, and I was really struck by how she started her Academy Award, her acceptance speech. And she said, "You know, there's one place that all the people with the greatest potential are gathered. One place, and that's the graveyard. People ask me all the time, what kind of stories do you want to tell? And I say, exhume those bodies, exhume those stories. The stories of the people who dreamed big and never saw those dreams to fruition. People who fell in love and people who lost. I became an artist, and thank God I did, because we are the only profession that celebrates what it means to live a life. That's what libraries are about. We are here to celebrate what it means to live to your fullest and to offer you every opportunity to enrich, to educate, to edify, to connect, to learn, and to enjoy. And I really hope that you take a chance to read this book or perhaps many of the other great authors that we have on our shelves. And don't forget, if you were waiting to hear something called the secret code, remember, folks, we are in this life together, and that code is together02. So thank you for your time. Thanks for putting up with this unusual environment I am in reading from. But I do hope you give this book a try because it took me a long time to pick up this because I'm not a big fiction reader, but what a reward it was. And I can't wait to read more from Zora Neale Hurston. Thank you, folks. Remember,